All right, and he will be talking about vegetation management.
I came up with this title. I think it was. So I know you're all thinking the same thing I am. Weeds, finally. Right? So I went over my talk last night and realized that I've got probably, I don't know, an hour and a half worth of material. So you're going to have to, when you're sitting at home having a nice glass of wine, go over the weed science section. I've asked Carl at 10 minutes before the end of my talk to stop me so I can actually move down to different types of cover crops. I want to make sure I cover that. So like I said, last night I was going over my talk. I sent it to Con a little while ago and realized there's no way. But I want to make sure you get this information. It is, broad, sort of a broad brush when it comes to vineyard weed management and cover crops. Some of you have probably heard me speak before. But the first thing I'm going to cover is something that I didn't think. I've been doing this as an advisor for 12 years, but with UC for 35 years, weed science and mostly in perennial crops, that I didn't think I'd have to answer again, but it seems to come up all the time now. It's like how to use the, no. There we go. Why manage weeds? Because I get that a lot. I get people, because it seems like why we have pathogen control, powdery mildew and those sorts of things, and why we control bugs, because we know that they're going to completely destroy your crop. But people often wonder, and because weed science, at least recently, has become semi-controversial, you might have heard. So oftentimes I have to explain to people why we even control weeds. So I do talk about direct competition in young vines. Now this is a fluvelum plant, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but there's a milk carton under there. But what's interesting is that those of you who are North Coast, Central Coast, foothills growers, I work mostly in those areas, all the way down like to Santa Barbara and then over. I don't work much in the Central Valley because I had somebody one time recently come up to me and say, John, why do we control weeds? I just saw a report that said somebody did some work that showed that if you put weeds in a mature vineyard, that there is absolutely no loss in yield. And we were standing in the middle of the Napa Valley. So I looked at this young man and said, so you're managing these grapes for maximum yield? And he looked at me and said, well, no. I said, you never hear me talk about maximum yield from our grapes, which is why I don't work in some other areas where that's where they're looking for. It's not what you always think it is. Some people think, well, it's just to make the vines look nicer, or it's strictly for competition. But it's not. And I think sometimes it surprises people. Obviously, with young vines, competition is very important. Water or stress management, now this is a form of competition, but when this really comes into play is, so you're looking at how much, winemakers looking at how much water each vine gets. Well, what if only half of your vineyard has weeds? How do you know? You think you know. What if we get that the weather is coming at, I don't know if I have this slide too. We're in September, or we're in early October, and we see that north wind's coming in, and it's going to be at 5% humidity, and you've got those grapes just on the edge, and you need to get water out there. Daniela can't help you because the weeds are going to be taking that water. So having them there is really it's not always what people think. Frost protection. Now this is a picture of trees, in case you were wondering. But what I like to talk about is that anytime we have weeds growing, we're going to get less radiation, absorption in the soil, and then re-radiation. There's also another thing too, is that, well, I think I'll talk about that a little bit later, another one. Harbor other pests. Voles are tiny little animals, but they're a huge problem. I tell people, I think, and I don't have the data for this, but I would say sometimes it's 25 to 30% of the growers do weed control strictly for voles. Right? And you all know about grapes. The cambium layer on this huge grape plant is how thick? About that thick, right? Those little voles get hungry, they can girdle your vines and they'll be gone. And I've had some people tell me that they've lost 1 in 6 vines taking over in a sort of a semi-abandoned vineyard. Any place where you have cover that can protect the voles from the predators, they go nuts. You can ask Rhonda Smith about a trial we did years ago called Mow and Blow, which was, the weed control was fantastic. But we almost had to protect Rhonda from being carried off by voles. I mean, they were everywhere. They were under this straw, and they just were happy as... It's the only time in my years of working in vineyards where I've actually walked into the middle of the day and seen voles just running between the vines in the middle of the day. They were happy. Block air movement. This isn't for every weed, but we do get weeds like this. This is panicle willow, or if you're down maybe on the central coast, you have horseweed or mare's tail, one of these weeds that grows upright. When you're looking at frost protection, or if you're looking for less pathogens, what do you want? You want air movement, right? Don't you spend out there pulling the leaves off to get more air movement? Or when you have your wind machines out there, you want the air to move? Well, if you have these weeds blocking it, it's a reduced air movement. Interfere with harvest operations. So by hand or machine, having the weeds up in a cluster is not a good thing. And like I tell people, say you have a vineyard and a certain part of this vineyard, when it's clean, it takes an hour to harvest. Well, you've got weeds like this, it takes you an hour and a half. But you don't have to be much of a mathematician to figure out the labor charges are going to be half again as much. And you talk to any of the people working in the vineyards, they don't like this. And if there's a shortage of vineyards and they're getting paid maybe by how much they're harvesting, I don't know if that's legal anymore or not, but maybe they go across the street because they can harvest more. I haven't said competition once except for young vines. Affect crop quality. This can happen with many weeds, but we're particularly on the coast now, the weed that's been moving is this stinkwort. And there's other weeds that have these oils that may or may not affect the quality of the wine. We just don't know. You just don't like to have them there. So, when you talk about weeds and cover crops, you talk about a good IPM program. So know the ecology and the dynamics of your crop. That's the most important thing. And all of you, if you didn't know before, after how long you been here? 12 days? Whatever. Yeah. You know the dynamics of your crop. And I use this. I kind of took this from the Great Pest Management Guide, and I've switched in where the weeds are. But over here, where your harvest, your leaf drop, your bud break, you have to know what the dynamics of your crop are to do a good job of dynamics with the weeds, or IPM. Know your weeds. Identification and biology. So I've been, like I said, an advisor for 12 years. I've worked with UC in weed science for 25 years before that, so about 37 years now. And I've taught a lot about ID and biology of weeds. And what's interesting is that people have asked me about, the reduced use of Roundup. And I said, man, as far as I'm concerned, as someone who teaches identification biology, it's wonderful. Why? Because for years I would do this, and the PCAs would sit in the back and go, I don't care. I'm just going to go back and spray it with Roundup. So now that you have to know a little bit more, what I've been teaching for all those years becomes really important. It's just not learning how to use this thing. So identify, malva. People always ask me, John, we have these huge cheeseweed or malva plants. How do we control them? If you've heard me speak, you know this one already. There's only one way. With iron, hardened on the end of a stick. I know it's been 8 days or whatever it's been. But this is when you want to identify them here with these little heart-shaped cotyledons. Right? Get them early. Know that. And here, of course, you all can identify these seedlings. Right? Fillery, and there's some willowherb in here. What else? I think, anyway, no, you can't. Know which ones are resistant to glyphosate if you are using it. Willowherb. This is what glyphosate does to willowherb. Absolutely nothing. This is ryegrass up here. Absolutely nothing. You need to know that. Ryegrass. This is what I went to a field. This is not misapplication. This is resistance. And those of you who know a little bit about some of these post-emergent herbicides know that ryegrass has become resistant to a whole bunch We found Roundup for years. We've known that it's been resistant to glyphosate. Glufosinate, it's really harder to tell. And this is from the North Coast. Fusilade, another grass herbicide, completely resistant this crop that we had here. Paraquat, this is from Chico. The fact that a weed is actually, those of you who know paraquat, the fact that a weed is actually resistant to paraquat almost makes me believe in Bigfoot again. It's one of these things that can never happen. It's actually, ryegrass is actually taking that paraquat and pushing it into the vacuoles. But with glyphosate, it's metabolizing it. So it's doing what all these gene companies want to do. It's stacking the different ways of having resistance. I like to call ryegrass the cockroach of the weed world, because it's going to be here long after we are. Have a monitoring program and use it. Don't just say you have one, use it. So this is sharp point fluvelin. It's become a problem all over the North Coast and is moving everywhere. The seeds last for 20 years, so it's really hard to have a long-term control. But what we did and this is what happens, what's interesting, and those of you from Sonoma County know that it's a pretty bad weed when it's growing, but it's almost as bad and maybe even worse when it dies and leaves a skeleton, because when the grape leaves fall, they get stuck and you can't do any pre-emergent herbicide. You really can't get to the weeds. You have to really clean that whole old skeletons off. So this is some work I did at the Oakville field station years ago, and this was we did some different treatments, and this happened to just be a glyphosate treatment. But what I wanted to show you here is that these rows were 126 feet long. I laid down a transect of tape, and every 6 inches I just said, what's here, what's here, what's here. And there was a bunch of other weeds, but this was the fluvelin part. And this is 4 different replications, different rows down there. You can see here, this is where the fluvelin was. You can see here, year 1. And what's interesting is if I would have gone in and tried to control it here, that would have been pretty good. You can see it was coming in from the south west corner of the vineyard. Year 2, when I did a rating, now it'll be the same row the second year. Here, you can see all of it here. And now it's moved into row 3, which is about another 10 rows, a different replication, another 10 rows down, and actually even into row 4. This is maybe because of cultivation, movement of the seeds, and then finally in year 3, we've got it all along here, over here, and down here. If we would have gone back to year 1, saw that weed, know that the seeds last 20 years, that it germinates late in the season, we could have controlled it then and not had a problem. So have a monitoring program, use it. Don't just fill out the UCIPM page and say, I have these weeds. Consider all management techniques and determine which is best for you. So now we're going to take a trip and talk about a bunch of different kinds of weed control. Undervine cover cropping and mowing. So, I get a lot of questions now about, John, can we plant a cover crop under the vines? If you don't have voles as a problem, we've done some work over the years with some Zorro fescue, an annual reseeding fescue that died. Once it senesces in late winter, early spring, it's gone. Right? You can water all you want on top of it, and it won't come back. Unlike Blando brome, which if there's a little water, it'll stay green, or if you have annual ryegrass will stay as green as long as you have water. So why would we want to do something like this? Well, we do get good weed competition, and I'll show you some other pictures. Erosion control. If you've noticed, it's been raining, and you have noticed, right? And you're going through the vineyards. I know, God, you've been here 5 days. These usually work in a half-an-hour session. The water's like running down the rows where we have the herbicide treatments. And then, not a lot that we started some work years ago about keeping everything in the soil. Not my specialty, but it can happen. The big thing about having this is you really need some kind of mower. I have an experiment going up at the Hopland field station, and I'm really lucky that my mower is Ryan Kiefer. Ryan gets out there, he's with the class here today. Ryan gets out there with the weed eater very carefully around the vines because it's small plots. But you have to do that to really keep it knocked down. And you can see we're keeping it down. You have to do this several times. Voles will have a little problem here. They may be living out here. So this is the work that I did at Oakville before, and all I wanted to show you here was that in this treatment, where what happened is we did cultivation treatments. Well, historically, there had been Zorro fescue planted at the vineyard at Oakville. And when we cultivated and didn't spray any, no post-emergent applications, actually no treatments at all, it actually threw some of the Zorro fescue under the vines. And this was after a couple years, and what we found out here was that when you look at the percentage, again, those transects, of how many weeds there were, you see that almost, but in most cases here, 90% of the vine row was covered by this dry grass, or this Zorro fescue that had died, and it really kept a lot of the weeds down. It won't keep bindweed down. It just really, bindweed will come the perennial morning glory. It comes up from the back and just grows over the top. But it keeps all the other annual weeds down. If you looked at some of the other treatments, the glyphosate treatment here, the willow herb was probably in 60% of the plots. And this is what it looked like. Now, the problem you would say here is that, well, it's collecting those leaves. Well, it's not a problem to collect the leaves because you're not spraying. So it doesn't really matter. There is a problem, though. Voles. So tillage. You know, every time somebody asks me about tillage, we sort of moved away from French plowing for reasons that you know better than I because of being viticulturalist. Because it works on weeds. There's no question. But what we have is that when you have a vineyard, are you suitable for using cultivation? Do you have Johnson grass? Those of you who are not in the North Coast, you have a weed like this that has rhizomes that you're going to be tilling and moving around? Carl's shaking his head yes. If you're closer in the Central Valley, it can really be a problem. Excellent weed control and non-chemical. Timing, very important. Weeds are very small. Someone today asked me about the color of Roundup out in the fields. You see a lot of yellow fields. A lot of people are spraying. Why? Well, it's hard to get a tiller in now. It's going to be hard to get a tiller in until April. You know, May. If you're in Carneros, I would try for next year. So there, I mean, yes, tillage, and there's a lot of places where you can till, just not all the time and not every year. Tillage, fossil fuel use. We have to think about that. You know, we talk about how wonderful it is, but you're in a big tractor going up and down a lot. Look at this soil. Now, I know we're doing it in a small area under vines, but when you talk to the USDA, they say the worst thing you can do to a soil is cultivate it. Maybe shallow cultivation once in a while is okay, just not all the time in deep tillage. And erosion. I mean, if you had it tilled this fall, it would be easy to collect your soil because it'll all be at the end of the field. You know, you also have to have some skilled operators. Now, this is a disease that I know no one talked about, tractor blight. It really can be a serious problem. If you're doing it, think about hiring someone. Flaming. I get a lot of questions about flaming. It works pretty well, and timing is very, very important. The weeds have to be succulent, green, and small because I've had and I talked to a lot of master gardeners, I've had so many of them say, John, can I use a flamethrower on the weeds? I said, you can, but that's not the same thing. Right? Because when you're using a flamer, what's killing the weeds? Not the flame, the heat, right? Because what we're doing is we're boiling the water on the inside of those weeds and breaking the cell wall so the plant actually dies of desiccation. So they can't be really big. There's no resistance. You know, some weeds you can, but you're not going to develop resistance to that. If they do, then I would leave town. No residue. You know, it kind of flames away, so there really is no residue. Non-chemical. It is non-chemical for being propane. But what are the disadvantages? I mean, I've worked with some growers. I really enjoy working with organic growers because as much as I can go out and say, well, this will kill this, it's so much more fun for me to actually do this kind of stuff. I like to get out there and look at other ways. Timing is very important. The weeds can't be dry and they have to be small. Not as good on grass. You've ever been to an organic vineyard that uses flaming and you see it's all grass and no broadleaves? You all know why. Anybody? Because the growing point of grasses is at or below the soil level, so it's just like you're cutting it off. Where with the broadleaf plants, the growing point is up in the axis, so you're actually killing them. So you will switch over to grass. Cost, fuel's pretty cheap. Depends on, 10 years ago it was a lot more expensive. And there's always the potential for fire hazard. Now this was very small as we were out doing this experiment, or actually just out observing. We were walking along and stamping out the fires because any place you have old dead grasses, they will catch fire. So, animals. So what's interesting is that I've done more work with animals in conventional vineyards than I have in organic vineyards. A lot of conventional growers see the benefit of sheep, especially to clean up the vineyards. So, in the right job, there are a lot of star thistle in winters. They can do a great job of weed control. This one, they got the sheep in a little too late. And it was a year like this, and the bud break, so they got them out. So all they got was a bunch of really fat ewes, but they didn't get much weed control. But the thing is that, do you rent or you buy? If we're looking at this mob stocking of 200 to 300 sheep per acre, to really get in, not just let them wander around, and do not mention baby dolls to me. Right? I'm agriculturalist. We raise the sheep. We get $1 a pound. We sell the lambs, and we move on. Baby dolls are for the tasting room. I mean, not tasting the lamb. That's the other one. Just so they look good. Luckily for us, there's no health or safety restrictions in vines because of what we make, because we make wine out of them. Other orchard crops have that problem. So this is a conventional vineyard in Yolo County before. This is after. So what they do is that they have, it's about 2,400 acres. They're up in some sheep ground up in the Dunnigan Hills. They move the sheep in after the end of the year to clean out all their old barnyard grass. Basically, they have a Sauvignon Blanc vineyard. The sheep are right next to it, the first one they harvest, and it moves on. So they do a very nice job. Then they can get in and do their work. So this is really nasty, but again, with the advent of some of our vines being trellised higher, you may be able to keep sheep in longer. Some people are doing that. Herbicides. We got a whole bunch of herbicides. I always love this picture. People always go, John, what do we do without glyphosate? And usually I just show the picture with glyphosate out. You got a lot of options, right? If you want to use it, go ahead. If you don't want to use it, go ahead too. So the thing about it though is that, we usually get this pretty consistent control. When we look at herbicide versus maybe some drastic cultivation, you can say the herbicides are probably easier on the vine. Now, this is a drastic case because now most of our cultivation is much smaller, much closer to the top of the soil. Herbicide resistance. We've developed quite a bit of herbicide resistance. Ryegrass, horseweed, fleabane, even annual bluegrass, not a big problem in vineyards. But we're starting to see a lot of weeds become resistant because of an overuse of one particular herbicide, and in some areas, cross resistance. But we also have tolerance. We have some weeds, in the Napa, especially in Napa, panicle willow herb, Epilobium brachiocarpum, completely tolerant to glyphosate, never been killed by it. There are some weeds like that. So I wanted to talk about this. This is some work I did, seems like a long time ago, 10 years ago. So when you are out there, make that extra pass maybe to rake the plots if you're going to be making any herbicide applications. We have some people that have put different kinds of blowers of some kind on front of their tractors, or even tied some backpack air blast or air blowers to the front of their ATVs to get the leaves out. Why? Well, you can use a sidewalk sweeper. So what I did here in this trial is so this would be considered here 60% leaf cover, right? And then what I did was I had paired plots. So in each plot, I raked half the plot and left the leaves in half the plot. Just observationally, I decided that was 60% leaf cover. The one next to it, I raked off. Then we went through with, I have that, where did I have it? Well, what we went through with 1 quart, here, plots raked and treated on December 19th with 10 ounces of Chateau and 24 ounces of Roundup. Now, what we did is we raked and sprayed the same day, so it's not like we raked and more weeds came up. So that would be maybe another advantage. So when I rated in March, which was 3 months later, this is fillery cover. And so percent cover of fillery, the lower number, the better. And you can see here, this is 60% leaf cover, all the way down to 25% leaf cover. You can see where we raked, we had a lot less fillery cover than we did in the not raked. Right? And what was even more astounding to me is that in June, when we were looking for willow orb control, we had, where we raked, we had almost 100% control. Where we didn't rake, you can see we had 60%. So the question is that, when you're down here, is it really worth getting the leaves off? Up here it definitely is. So what happens is people say, well, leaves are a good mulch. They're not. They either blow away or they break down and the weeds come up through them. So this is what I like to talk to people about when you look at a program. I always tell people, if you have a weed program and let's say you're supposed to spend $100 a year, what happens is most people spend $80 a year, right? I tell them, give me the over a 3-year period, give me the $300 or $240, and by the 4th year we can probably save money. Why? Because we need to do a bunch of different things. By continually chasing the weeds and leaving this and then having it build back in, you're never going to get ahead. 1 year maybe of cultivation, 1 year of really good pre-emergent herbicide, you get this, the leaves fall to the ground, the wind comes up, they blow away. Right? So you don't have to do the other operation. Then you can maybe go back next year with a cultivation, or maybe just a post-emergent spray. But we continually, after we've done the budget for pathogens and insects, maybe some cover crop, whatever's left is to control the weeds. I think if you can look at it in just a little different way, we can maybe get up there a little better. I may be able to make it through most of this. Vineyard floor management. So this is when people talk about cover crops. They really are broken down into 2 areas. The middles are one, and then under vine. So in the middles, you basically have 2 options. No cover crop or cover crop. Man, a lot of places, no cover crop is not an option. Some places, they'll end up doing that. Potential benefits, and there's a list, and we've gone over these for years. Vineyard access in the winter, maybe not this year. Most years, you can get in. Reduce soil erosion and off-site movement. Addition of organic matter. Enhanced pest management. There's a whole list. Improve soil structure and water penetration. Now, if you don't have anything there, the water will just tend to not move in. We see that under the vines. I tell people that, even in the best operations, I would love to see cultivation once every few years just to sort of break up the soil under the vine. Enhanced aesthetics. Addition of nutrients. Nitrogen in some cases. Competition for moisture and nutrients. Growth management. I know this is sometimes a thought that's foreign to other places in the world, that they're actually planting a cover crop to reduce the growth of some of their crops. Not so foreign here. Potential drawbacks. Increased frost hazard. Again, I talked about frost before. Competition for moisture and nutrients. Now, this could be a real problem. We've had some, during the drought years, there was some turf-type tall fescues that were grown, and some fairly young vines. And when there's some competition for water, those fescues, they will really suck the water out of the ground. Increased vertebrate pests. I keep going back to those darn little voles. Addition of nutrients. Some cover crops you're maybe going to get 2 vines that are too vigorous. I know we don't always want that. What little I know about vines. Additional equipment. Now, I know a lot of people who have wonderful vineyards, high-priced wines, who are still putting their cover crops out with belly grinders, and they're wondering why they're not growing. Get a drill. Sorry. I know. I haven't been here the whole time, as you probably know. I've been out, so I haven't been sitting in a room for all these days. Increased water use. You plant a cover crop, you're going to need water. It's going to take water. It's going to get water. Increased cost and management. You're going to have to pay for cover crops. You know, oftentimes, again, I get those same people going, well, can we get by with barley? Well, you can. What do you want from your cover crop? Middles are managed as no-till mode, permanent, or annual cover. How am I doing, Carl? I may be able to make it all the way through. Oh, I think I'm going to be okay. All right. Cultivated mow-down mix. Combination each other row. So what are the advantages to no-till? Right? Erosion control and, again, reduced off-site movement. More competitive to weeds. Now, you know, we are getting to a point where we keep finding a lot of weeds in the middles now. You know, and I went out to an organic vineyard, and there was ryegrass growing on the sides and bristly oxtongue, pretty nasty biennial broadleaf weed growing in the middles. And it was, you know, why is this happening? Well, it was pretty obvious. Where the wheels of the tractor knocked the ryegrass down, the mower went over and it could come back up. Where they had the mower set too low, it killed the ryegrass, and this oxtongue was left, the ground was left open or scalded so it could come back up. See, that's fun for me, that kind of stuff. So, you know, I said either get a roller for your mower or just raise it a little bit. Again, a lot of the same things for no-till. What are the disadvantages? Higher potential for frost again, and Ryan can tell you that Glenn McGuarty, who was here before, talked about cover crops. I don't know if he talked about the work that he's been doing with ice minus and looking at, you know, did he talk about it, Ryan? A little bit. So this is, you know, getting those things mowed down. You can't just leave them up. You know, and where we are now, if it continues to rain like this, it's going to be hard to get back in and mow those cover crops down. Maybe you can use sheep, but get them some rubber boots. Increased water use. So mowing favors low-growing and perennial weeds. If you're mowing all the time in a perennial, you're going to get more cheeseweed. You're going to get more perennials. Cultivated middles, advantage. Added organic matter. You cultivate it, you plant and you cultivate them back in. Release of nitrogen, again, can be good. Reduced competition for water, look at that. Cultivated, nice and clean. Controls weeds in the middle. Nothing works like, again, iron. But there's increased erosion potential. Dust can be a big deal. Some areas, you know, having this heat source here can be a problem. Oh, I got increased erosion potential, so important I put it twice. So this is what I wanted to get to, Carl, so I guess I'm going to be okay with about 10 minutes to go. Just different types of cover crops. And if you have comments now or when we're done, you can talk about them. But so these are, when I first got to Napa 12 years ago, I went out and took some pictures of different kinds of cover crops, trying to figure out if there was any consistency. And I found out no. So resident vegetation. So people say, I'm just going to leave the weeds that are out there. In some cases, that's good. Not in all cases, depending on the weeds you have. If you're like this person who was over on Silverado Trail, about near Stag's Leap area, this is annual bluegrass and chickweed. This is a fantastic early dying annual weed, annual cover crop. Really nice. I would suggest if you had this, unless you were looking for more vigor reduction or more other nutrients, this is a fantastic cover. Resident mustards. We see some of this. We used to see a lot more of it. It is completely coincidental that the year after I started, the Napa Mustard Festival ended. It is not my fault. But, you know, we have these mustards. They're pretty, but they don't do the same things that we really want cover crops to. Yes, it opens up the soil. Yes, it has a little nematicidal effect, but these are flowering way too early. They're not really competitive. They don't grow like other mustards do, like these. Like, you know, in some areas where we're using Dalcon radish or some of these other hot mustards that really have that high glucosinolate numbers that We're not sure we're going to be able to drive your nematodes out, but we might be able to keep more nematodes from coming in, right? And they're not flowering. The picture's taken about the same time. They're still growing. You're going to have to knock these down. There's going to be a lot more meat in them. The other ones, it's okay, but it's mostly, we used to see a lot of those black, yellow mustards when we cultivated everything. They were just happy doing that. Better than nothing. Insectary mixes, annual reseeding grass, so this, usually a combination, Zorofescue, Blandobrome. What happens here is, it grows up, let it go to seed, you mow it down or cultivate it in, the seeds are there, they come back next year, so it's a semi-permanent, it's annual reseeding itself. Grass timing is very important. Cereals. Barleys. For me, I think that if you're looking at what you want to break down, oats break down very nicely, but oats get really tall. Some of these barleys, triticale, they're nice and short, can be pretty good. And you can see here why they have cereal growing in this vineyard. I have 10 minutes now. I think I'm going to be okay, actually. I've done this before, I guess. But look at these vines, man. They're pretty vigorous vines. They're hoping that this barley gets going, maybe going to suck some of that juice right out of those vines to kind of keep them less vigorous. You see this quite a bit here. Perennial legume clover. Now, don't see much of this in Napa. I see a little bit more of this in Sonoma, where the vines are usually a little bit farther apart and maybe a little bit more vigorous. Up in Mendocino County. Mostly we don't see a lot of the permanent clovers in Napa. And who knows how much longer we'll see permanent legume covers in the vineyards. I'm not going to go there. I'm not an entomologist. I'm not a viticulturalist either. So, but we have this sort of cover. Annual legume cereal mix. Now this is the OSB mix, the organic soil builder mix, those sorts of mixes where we have an oat or some sort of cereal along with now very little vetch. Why don't we plant vetch as much anymore? Because vetch climbs up the vines, ends up outside the vineyard as much as it is inside the vineyard. And anytime we get a legume growing in a natural area, it's going to increase the amount of our European annual grasses, right? And I know because when we started doing cover crop work, and there's some pictures of Rhonda and I doing cover crop work 30 years ago on the IPM website. I mean, I tell people you almost had to be a hippie to do cover crop work 30 years ago, right? Because it's people who want to do good. And vetch, the nice thing is that in 30 years ago, vetch was going to be the cure-all for everything. We weren't going to need fertilizers. We weren't going to need insecticides. We weren't going to need weed control because it was going to suppress them all out. What we found is that vetch, hard-seeded vetch especially, likes to move out of the vineyards. So what have we gone? We've gone to Austrian winter pea, fava bean, those sorts of things. A lot less movement out of the vineyard. Still get that legume. And oftentimes, sometimes they're planted at a ratio that really, the legumes are really only feeding those cereals that they're growing with. We don't get a lot of extra. It depends on the amount of, the percentage of each of the mixes you have. Perennial grass. So this is I think this is a sheep fescue, maybe a red fescue of some kind. So it's a low-growing, not a real competitive fescue, but it is a permanent grass. Perennial turf-type fescue. I took this picture several years ago before the drought started. This is not there anymore. This stuff will compete with your weeds. It'll compete with your vines. It's very, very competitive. It may, in the summertime, it's going to grow, and it's probably going to try and suck as much water as it can. So that may be it. So cover cropping in vineyards, a grower's handbook. The Ingalls Bug, Glenn McGordy book is still the Bible. That's great. The bad thing is we don't have a new Bible, right? The work is still good. It'd just be nice if we had some new cover crop work. And then we have another publication here on cover crop resources. So that's it. Oh yeah, the Sarah page still has some on cover crops. That's it. I made it. Wow. What's that? I might be able to. Oh, that one? Yeah. Yeah, well, maybe it was that glass of wine last night. I said, it's going to be way too many. So, yes.
John, I had a question.
You betcha.
We have had trouble with meadow voles in the past when we tried to do an all-native California grass cover.
Right.
Are there any solutions to that? Because I just love the concept.
Yeah.
And I hate spraying
Yeah.
if I can get away with it. So
But maybe you can talk to the voles. Tell them. No. The problem is, we do a lot of work. There's been a lot of work with predators, but it's still, they're hiding in there. And it's just, we can talk to Roger Baldwin, who's our vertebrate pest specialist. I don't know. I know that the less access or the less cover they have, usually the fewer you're going to have. So.
sheep grazing in there isn't going to disturb it for more than that day.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is too is mowing. Oftentimes when you mow, you mow it and it actually makes better cover for a while. So it's tough. A lot of these things that you want to do, voles can really, for being tiny little animals, they can really mess up all the things you want to do. So sorry about that. Yes.
So we have an undervine weed whacker.
Yep.
Tiller.
Yep.
And then I found just this past year that the undervine tiller will collect a bunch of trash as that blade passes under the vine. When it rotates around the trunk, it leaves a pile of trash right at the trunk.
Yeah.
That is actually a habitat for voles.
Yeah, it is.
They would live in that.
Yeah. Okay. No, yeah. You know what's
We proceeded to go and rake the pile out by hand.
it is when you talk to people, those people who have, when I talk about voles, a lot of people go, what are they talking about? And anybody who has vole problems you see heads shaking. It's amazing how this little rodent can cause so much destruction. So, yes, you're right. Oh, yes. John Mark.
Any comment on the, I think it's relatively new, organic herbicide weed slayer?
Okay, I don't. I know it's eugenol. They haven't come to us. I'm actually doing quite a bit of organic herbicide work right now. I would hate to have your job following me around. Working with suppress and those other things. I'm not quite sure. Are you? Some people who you're trialing it. Are you using it with the bee supplement or just by itself?
I think it's with the supplement.
Yeah, I'm interested in that supplement because that was actually the active ingredient that was registered as an organic fungicide. So I think it's breaking down the cell walls and getting in. So that because eugenol at 5% isn't going to do that much.
This seems to be working.
Yeah,
It's yellowing out.
yeah. And the thing is I did some work last week. We're actually working with some urban stuff for school districts because they've really gotten the pressure. So I did suppress and weed zap and these other ones. I just haven't had. I've been people talking about weed slayer. Suppress works pretty well too. I'd be interested to see how the weed slayer, like I said, they haven't come to me. If you know someone, if they'd like to come to me and have me take a look at it, I've got a spot, especially at the UC Davis campus. I'm doing some organic herbicide work. I'd love to have it in a trial just to take a look at it. They may or may not want me looking at it, but yeah, organic herbicides. When there is nothing, even the old this weed zap or even Matrane, anything with cinnamon or those, nothing works as well an hour or a day later than organic herbicides. They are world beaters. It's just the plants grow back. So you're going to have to do it a few times. If you get them when they're small, and they're not, I don't know how much weed slayer is, but I'm doing a trial up at the Hopland Field Station right now. And I'm looking at, Roundup, Lifeline or Rely, a conventional, which would be a post-emergent plus a pre-emergent, cultivation by itself, cultivation with an organic herbicide, which is suppress 2 times, and then Ryan treatment out there with a mower because we need to get it mowed down. I figured spraying late spring or early summer with organic herbicide since they're drying is not good anyway. But I'll just put it this way. Where I'm spraying the Roundup in a 2-gallon can, we're putting in 48 mils. Where I'm using the suppress at 7%, 528 mils. So we're using a lot more, and we have to spray 3 times. So you have to add that in. In some cases, it's worth it. You're going to because it's a contact herbicide. you'll probably end up switching over to grass. And I'll be showing that data. If you see me around, I've been showing that a lot. One more year of that study. Yes?
Well, to your knowledge, has anybody done some work to see the effect of covercrop on the radiation? Because you get a surface
Right.
that reflects radiation,
Right.
that radiation might be recaptured by the canopy, and it's a different intensity radiation. So,
You mean for frost protection or later?
well, no, sometimes the covercrop is terminated before the
Right.
season, right? I mean, April.
We like to get it out so we can get as much down for frost protection. I know they did that work. Dean Donaldson, some other people did that work years ago. But in table grapes, I know that I thought it was a weedy field, but I understand they were letting this crabgrass or cupgrass grow so they wouldn't get reflection off the soil and burn the grapes.
I'm not table grapes.
Somebody table grapes? I don't know.
There's a work done in prunes and peaches to lay down the tarps, white tarps,
Yeah.
to get more coloring in the peaches. And so,
That sounds like something Con would like to do.
well, I talked to him and he
No. That's for a viticulturalist. That's not what, I'm just trying to get cover crops out there early on.
We've done that work already. The reflection of that from the
Oh yeah, not that long ago, right?
no, it's not that long ago. In fact, one of our neighbors across the street, I won't mention the name, but it's an affluent winery. We've done a lot of work with their small roads that are in the wrong direction.
Yep.
That's like changing so on and so forth. A lot of the direct and indirect solar radiation absorbed by the canopy. So whatever's reflecting back from either bare soil or whatever we terminated is negligible. It's one of the most common questions we get. And
Even from our own researchers.
no, I'm not. It is a valid question.
Yeah, oh it is.
PNI just initiated a very large project with technology at Cooperative using surface renewal. So since trellis systems are changing,
Okay.
it's a valid question to look at it again. But that being said, VSP type canopies, we've not seen.
Indifferent. Okay. Is that, Lucia, we have questions for Lucia too? Are we going to sit?
yeah, so if we want to move into our last section, if Lucia wants to come back up here, we'll be taking questions.
As long as there's people here, we'll stay.
I don't guarantee that.
Yeah.
I have to drive back to Fresno tonight, and my wife's already mad at me for being gone this long.
You haven't been married long enough. My wife, never mind. I keep forgetting I'm being recorded.
Up to questions for either John or Lucia. So if you guys have any lingering questions on weed or cover crop management or on insect pests.
I have one for John.
Yep.
John, is there any hope that having a grower that is very aggressive trying to protect and replace the weed combination he has that is very aggressive growing and putting a mix year over year, I don't know how many years, until the time that those combinations are good sources of nitrogen or protection or whatever take over
Yeah.
the other ones? Is there any information,
Yeah.
some experiments done on that respect?
So, but basically what we have done, for a lot of reasons, we're always looking at basically clean, for one reason or another, vine rows, right? So we're always going to have to do something there. In the middles, there are things that you can do. The weeds aren't as much of a problem in the middles. A few years of cereal and then a smother crop, you can do that in the middles. It's just under vine, they would act as badly as the weeds do. So that's why, and oftentimes, when I first got here, not coming from a great background, I asked the growers, they're looking at trying to get so much suppression or maybe a reduction in growth by having their cover crop. And I said, oh, your weed strip is this big and your middles are this big. And I said, how did you determine how wide your cover crop is? Everybody knows the answer. It's how wide our mower is. So, couldn't you maybe buy a bigger... Yeah, we thought about that, but no. So if you're... yeah, so that's how they determine how wide. They're talking about using it for aggressive, but I said, maybe if you get closer, maybe you get farther apart, maybe, yeah. Cover crop is way down on the list again. But it can be an important tool. And I like to tell people that knowing what cover crop to plant is like doing a pesticide recommendation. You can really mess things up with the wrong cover crop. You can suck them dry, or you can put too much in. You really should know, and not just, because my neighbor's using OSB, I should use it.